All right.
Thank you.
Oh, and the wand. All right, cool. So, yeah, I'm Mike Zatarga. How many of us are ex-military? Good, good, because this is an interesting little bit of program. When I first started writing this, I did not realize that this was the first, well, what would we call it? First landing under fire for the United States military. Yeah, the Marines didn't do it first, it was Army, which is really shocking to me too, yeah. But okay, how many of us have actually heard of the Battle of Roanoke Island? Good. I'm glad we're starting out from a higher level than most of my crowds. So let's go back. It's 1861 in the Union Army, and well, the president is not doing too well because, well, the Union Army can't put a victory together on the field at all. There's war weariness in the entire North. They're thinking about maybe it's not worthwhile to do this. And there's European recognition. France and Britain are making comments about joining the Confederacy and ending this war. And, well, it starts off with the battlefield defeats. Obviously, Manassas, July, right outside of D.C. Wilson's Creek, a month later, right out there in Missouri. All right. And then this one is a smaller battle, but almost as important when you realize who was actually killed in it. The Battle of Ball's Bluff, right outside Leesburg, Virginia. A Union brigade tries to cross the Potomac in a reconnaissance in force and gets cut to ribbons. The commander, Colonel Edward Baker, was a personal friend of the president. He was the former senator of Oregon, and when Lincoln was a up-and-coming freshman congressman, it was Baker who showed him the ropes. How close were they? Well, obviously, when he dies, Baker's family can't come all the way from Oregon, so the Lincoln family steps in as their proxies. That's how much it hurts. There's general war weariness in the North. I mean, we're already had more casualties now than we've had in the Mexican War. Then most wars already up to this time in the American history. And even people like Horace Greeley, who are the voice of the Republican Party at this point. Well, notice the date. It's not even Manassas yet. And this is what Greeley says in an editorial. And if they cannot be beaten, talking about the Confederacy, if our recent disaster is fatal, do not fear to sacrifice yourself to your country. If the rebels are not to be beaten, if that is your judgment in view of all the light you can get, then every drop of blood henceforth shed in this quarrel will be wantonly, wickedly shed, and the guilt will rest heavily on the soul of every promoter of the crime. I pray you to decide quickly and let me know my duty. That's the Republican mouthpiece. That's Lincoln's party right there. And they're telling him, if you can't do it, just, end it. Let's just give up. In Europe, well, like I said, they're watching from a sideline, but they're not participating officially. And although this is a 1862 quote, this is the British government's underlying thought. William Gladstone, who is the prime minister at this point, will say it perfectly. We may be for or against the South, but there is no doubt that Jefferson Davis and other leaders of the South have made an army. They are making, it appears, a navy, and they have made what is more than either, they have made a nation. We may anticipate with certainty the success of the Southern states so far as regards to their separation from the North. Read between the lines. What is that saying? If we're the British, we should be on the Confederate side. We should end this. And a lot of people point out that, well, weren't France and Britain against slavery? Well, true, but they're in there for their own interests. And the United States at this point has become an economic powerhouse. If they can split the South off, they'll cripple one and destroy the other. So obviously, yeah, it's definitely one of those for their best interests. Actually, to go back on that, one last bit, the French ambassador, Henri Mercier, has actually approached Gladstone and several members of the British government about putting French troops on British warships and steaming up the Potomac. That's the end of the war. There's no way the Union could fight the Confederacy and the two greatest world powers of the time. It's over. Well, the Union need a better battle plan, and they're going to go back to an old one that they ridiculed before Manassas, called the Anaconda Plan. Winfield Scott, the Virginian who stayed with the North, is going to suggest they just throttle the Confederacy economically, cut them off from outside influence. To do that, well, they're going to start pushing all the coastlines. But why Roanoke Island? I mean, how many of us have been to that? Most of us. Yeah, it's not much of anything. Yeah, I lived there. It's 3 miles wide and 12 miles long, and you can do it in about 12 minutes. Well, with our speed limits, less. But it all borders down on Virginia, right? At this point, we've got the Union Army in Washington, D.C., and the Confederate Army sitting outside at Manassas. As that both sides build forces, a up-and-coming brigadier general named Ambrose Burnside, one of the few heroes at Manassas, his troops fought very well. They left early. That's why they missed the rout. Is a best friend of the new Union General-in-Chief, George B. McClellan, who you see in his Napoleonic-style pose there. Burnside wants to create a coastal division. We'll get more onto that a little bit later, but the idea is that they're going to be the end-around attack on any Confederate coastal or fortification. Originally, as you see that little dotted line, the Union Army of the Potomac was supposed to go to Urbana, which would have been putting them really right on a straight line to Richmond. Problem was, when the Confederates caught wind of the Union troops moving, they pushed back to Fredericksburg, would put them in a blocking position against the Urbana attack. Well, McClellan just pushed it further down onto the peninsula outside of Fortress Monroe. That kind of shouldered Burnside's coastal division out of Virginia. The next state to the south is us, is North Carolina. Here's the state. Here's our battlefield. It's 3 miles wide, 12 miles long. 45% of it is too swampy to be used. There are 2 small settlements. Yes, Roanoke Islanders are rather, pedantic people. If one of them was called the South End, what was the name of the other town? North End. Yeah, we weren't really creative. Most of them are Unionists, which usually shocks the heck out of everyone because it's North Carolina. They fought for the South. But look at where their money comes from. Economics do a lot of your decisions for you. They mostly do lumber and fishing. Well, where is that wood and fish going? They're going north to the immigrant centers that are Philadelphia, Boston, New York. They're not going to Raleigh. They're not going to Richmond. And those salvage rights. Think about your insurance companies. When you look at your car insurance, who do you pay it to? What states? Huh? Yankees. Yeah, Hartford, Connecticut, New York, Chicago, Illinois. They were there then. So back then, you had 2 ways of saving your investment if your ship wrecked. Either way, you're going to have to talk to the locals. You got to put a guard on it, or you're going to have to reclaim it. Otherwise, the people in the Outer Banks do land pirating. They take the ship apart and use the wood and sell the goods. And they still do it. In 1989, a container landed on Hatteras filled with restaurant-sized, this tall, restaurant-sized bags of Dorito Cool Ranch chips, and the locals cracked open the lock and stole the whole thing. Even though Frito-Lay told them they were going to press charges, come and get us. So that's the Outer Banks for you. I guess. I couldn't stand Cool Ranch. Yeah. But and then the federal government pays a lot out here. Lighthouses. That's a federal job. They're going to pay people locally to do it. Piloting. You're going to get that ship across the bar, you got to talk to somebody. That person's going to get paid out of the federal till. No one gets anything from Raleigh. Now, you guys out here in Wilmington, you had a railroad that came down here. There was nothing that in the eastern part of the state to Roanoke Island. The only time they saw anybody from Raleigh was tax time. And suddenly, when the war starts, they're told they're cut off. They can't go fishing. They can't send their stuff out. They're done. They're economically cut off. Okay, there we go. Why are the Union looking at this place? Because it's the cork in a bottle. It is really, pull this out and everything opens up. Take Roanoke Island, the little red star there. You take Norfolk from the south, the place where it's not guarded. All the defenses point out into Newport News. You can take all the inland cities. Plymouth, Morehead City, well, eventually Morehead City, but New Bern, Washington, all the other spots, Plymouth. You can eventually capture Morehead City. Now, think about this. Although North Carolina has got about 350 miles of coastline, there's only 5 entry-exit points. 3 of them are in the Outer Banks. Oregon Inlet, Ocracoke Inlet, and Hatteras Inlet. Well, those are pretty much taken off the border already in August. The Union Army has already captured Hatteras and is just sitting, waiting for anything coming in and out of those ports. Morehead City is your other one, and you guys are the last one, Wilmington. Break the rail lines at Weldon. There are only 2 north-south rail lines in the Confederacy that go into the Virginia, right? One of them isn't even created yet, and that's the Danville through Greensboro line. That won't be finished until 1864. This coastal line is basically it. All the supplies from the deep south go up the rail lines through to Weldon, where all those lines meet, and then they go up to Richmond and the Confederate Army. From that spot near Plymouth, they're about 150 miles away. The Union Army could easily strike it, break the rail line, and starve the Confederacy out. And then, and this was part of Burnside's original plan, launch a land assault from New Bern onto the landward side of Wilmington. Take the state out economically all the way. It was a great plan. What happened? Well, the Confederates had an interesting response to it. To say that they were kind of lackadaisical would be really putting a good spin on it. Starting in 1861, the Confederates are going to build 3 forts on the island. Fort Bartow, Fort Huger, Fort Blanchard, and Fort Bartow. Then they're going to put 2 2 canal boats together and make it a fort on the other side called Fort Forest. In case the Union troops do land on the island, they're going to put a 3-gun battery in the middle. And, well, Roanoke sounds like it might be an easy access. It's actually more shallow than all the other water around. So they really just put a small gun battery there. To keep any ships from sailing through the ship channel, they're going to sink pilings and ships, mostly schooners, into that area to try to hang them up so that the guns can do the damage. Sounds like a great idea. They're going to get a great commander. They're going to get Henry Wise, the governor of Virginia. Remember John Brown? This is the guy who signed the death warrant in front of his daughter while she was pleading for his life. And then he lit up a cigar in front of her. So the man he's one of the guys who really pushed Virginia over the border into the Confederacy. He is a strident secessionist, and he has no military experience. His military experience is commander-in-chief of the Virginia militia when he was governor. So none at all. He gets sent out west to Virginia, Western Virginia, West Virginia today, where he meets up with another ex-governor of Virginia, John B. Floyd. And they're all placed under a small, unknown Confederate commander named Robert E. Lee. You might have heard of him, right? Now, Floyd and Wise go at each other like hammer and tongs. They hate each other. They won't come to each other's support when the Union troops attack. They won't help anyone. They won't send supplies to each other. They get so bad that Lee does what anyone would do if you have 2 children who are fighting. You separate them as far away as possible. So he sends Floyd out to Tennessee, and he sends Wise down here. And then he does an uncharacteristically thing. He quits and becomes a advisor to Jefferson Davis. So yeah, going to the Outer Banks in this time is basically being exiled from politics. Now, Wise and his troops are in West Virginia. You don't just travel straight across the state, not in that time. And it's going to take some time to go from the middle part of Western Virginia all the way out to Norfolk. Along the way, several of his regiments of his little brigade, his legion, are going to be cut off. One's going to get sent to South Carolina because I guess that was the orders. Nobody seemed to know what happened to him. But he will get reinforcements from the garrison here in Wilmington. He's going to get the 2nd North Carolina Battalion. Now, I did this trip today, and I got turned around, and it took me 5 hours. It took them 5 days. They get on the rail line on the 1st of February. And they take it all the way over to Elizabeth City, in which they arrive, 6 days later. They have to take a ferry boat that's going to take them down to the island, and they arrive on the day of the battle. That's not going to work out for them. We're going to just let you know it's a bad fight for them. Now, when Wise sends his troops over, well, they get in under the garrison of a man named Benjamin Huger, a major general. Huger is looking straight across Hampton Roads, and what does he see? Fort Monroe with its big U.S. flag looking back at him. He knows the attack is coming from that direction. So the first thing he does is he splits off Wise's field artillery units. All the trained artillerymen are going to stay in Norfolk for this entire battle. That might be part of the problem. Anybody know who the guy at the bottom left is? Or bottom right is? Charles Dimmock, the man who built the Petersburg lines, also lined out the lines here on Roanoke Island. Problem is, the same problem he had with Petersburg. He had these huge ideas for large numbers of troops that would never be there. And in the case of Roanoke Island, he had the idea that rifled cannon would be used perfectly to cut down on any ships going up the channel. Those fields of fire from the fort would overlap and easily cut down any Union gunboat going through. One slight problem. The Confederacy is not going to send rifled guns to an outpost like this. They send smoothbores. And, as you can see, they don't reach. So there's a problem. Yeah. The North Carolina troops that are supplied out here are horrible. Most of the well-trained and well-supplied ones have gone north. They're in the main army. The 2 regiments, the 8th, well, the 8th has got uniforms and a little bit of training, but the 31st, which comes out of New Bern, they don't even have one kind of weapon, it seems, that everyone uses. They carried shotguns and fowling pieces and flintlocks, and there were no uniforms. Wise was basically like, if you could send me something else, that would work out a lot better, but that's all he's getting. They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel at this point. And this is Benjamin Huger, and this is him in a nutshell. I do not consider large forces necessary for the defense of this island. Of the batteries can keep off the gunboats and the transports, the infantry will have little opportunity to act. So what's he do? He doesn't send anything. No matter how many times Henry Wise sends orders to the War Department demanding something, he's not going to get it. Meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, the Union Army starts on the 12th of January, heading south out of Fort Monroe with 70 vessels filled with 15,000 Union soldiers. Now they've got to get past Hatteras, which is the graveyard of the Atlantic. And yeah, they hit not just one nor'easter, they hit 2 of them back to back. The Union troops will call this Burnside's luck. They actually joked around about how the moment they touched North Carolina's shoreline, it rained. And it didn't stop until they left in July. But this is the other half of his luck. He only loses 3 ships. in all these storms. He only loses 3 supply ships, 1 carrying horses, 1 carrying food, and 1 carrying artillery ammunition. Even the crews got off. So there is a turn to the luck. Once they get inside the inlet and they get everyone off, the Union Army gets all kinds of luck. Right? There's an African-American fishing community outside of Hatteras called the Hotel d'Afrique, or the Afrique, depending on your French. And, well, the Union Army can't find any pilots that are going to take them up the channel, and the channel buoys have been taken out. So what a surprise, they literally are asking for help. And these African-American fishermen volunteer to be the pilots. They're watermen, they're fishermen. They know this area. They don't need shipping buoys. They know where every shoal is. As the Union Army gets on the new boats, after they've floated them over the bar and they're getting ready to go, they get one more piece of great news. A 16-year-old boy named Thomas R. Robinson shows up. Robinson had been a slave on Roanoke Island and was loaned out by his master to be a Confederate staff officer's personal body servant. Couldn't read or write, but he memorized the maps that he saw. When brought in front of General Ambrose Burnside, he laid out everything on the island. Every Confederate fort, where their campsites were, how many guns were in the fort, what their routes were. He knew everything. And that meant when the Union Army came, they knew everything. They knew more about this island than the Confederates who had been there for 9 months. Now let's talk about Burnside himself. Everyone knows the man with the whiskers. Yeah. Born in Indiana, his mother dies early in his life, and he becomes a West Point grad. Does a few stints in the military, but it's lackluster. Decides to quit and become an inventor of a carbine called the Burnside carbine. By the time it makes fruition, he realizes that there is let's just put it nicely, there's a lot of payola going on involved in government contracts. He was supposed to kick some money back to the inspectors so that they would get the contract. Burnside was a Christian man. He didn't believe in doing any of that, so he didn't get the contract. With that, his company fails, and he sells off the patent to the guns, which, of course, someone else picks up. Over 10,000 of those rifles will be used by Union cavalrymen. They will carry his name. He will see not one dime of it. That's Burnside's luck. He's strong-willed and well-liked. At Manassas, like I said, his troops fought very well. They actually pushed the Louisiana Tigers off the battlefield. They ran out of ammunition. They went home early, so they missed the rout. In the midst of all those storms, the one thing everyone saw and everyone mentioned was they saw Burnside lashed to the rigging, cheering them on, giving them courage. He is so popular with the Army. February 7th, the Union Army comes up to Hatteras. And at 10:30, they begun the bombardment. So imagine the map that I showed you with the pilings. The Union Navy is not going to go onto those pilings. That would be stupid. They're just going to pick the one fort that they need to hit, and that's going to be Fort Bartow. And they're going to smash the heck out of it. They're actually going to fire 800 rounds at that one little fort. They're going to knock down its flag. They're going to kill a grand total of 7 Confederates. And pretty much we're sure they didn't do that either, because one of the guns blew up. And that's about the gun crew of a large cannon. So that's what sand does for you, for defenses. Fort Fisher knows all about that too, right? This is where it gets interesting. The Union Army has this all planned out. Burnside has turned it over to one of his men, a guy named John Grubb Park, who's an engineer. Park lays out the plan. Every one of the brigades will put all their troops in the first wave into rowboats. Every one of them will see a tugboat with a flag that represents their brigade. They will row to that tugboat. They will hold on to the ropes that are coming off it. Once everyone's attached, those tugboats are going to go right for the shoreline. As soon as they start feeling resistance with the muddy bottom, they're going to haul on their whistles and they're going to reverse their engines. And as they do so, the rowboats will let go of the ropes and will be slingshotted right onto the shoreline. The first wave is 3,000 men strong. There were 2,500 Confederates on the island. So it works out for the Union. After the initial landing and they create their perimeter, they'll bring in larger ships like the ones you see in the background that will disgorge the rest of the army. By midnight, 11,500 men, 2 batteries of artillery, and all the horses that the officers could need, plus supplies. An impressive showing. The initial look, well, might look very similar today to that, or modern day like that. That's where they first came up with the idea. The first landing under fire. There were Confederate skirmishers in the swamps. There was a Confederate regiment about a mile off the landing spot waiting to assault. But the Union naval artillery kept them at a distance and allowed the Union Army to land. Now, the Confederate fleet, well, there were 7 ships out there called the Mosquito Fleet. They were pretty much what they were described as, mostly an annoyance. One of the Union gunboats actually carries more cannons on it than the entire Confederate fleet together. And there are 34 of them fighting. So yeah, they're outgunned. The commander, the man on the left, William Lynch, he even said to one of his captains as he went away, "Do come back for dinner if you're alive." He didn't have any faith that they were going to make it. As soon as the Union Navy shows up and starts pounding the forts, they come out to pick a fight. They want the Union ships to go onto those pilings. The Union aren't going to do that. But they are going to concentrate their fire on the gunboats as they go by. And on the first round, they hit one ship, the Black Warrior, and, well, she sladdles into the mainland swamps and doesn't sink too badly. On the second round, around 3 o'clock, they try again, and this ship, the Curlew, takes one. And as one officer said, it was as if someone threw a rock through a wet paper towel. It went right through the bottom, and she immediately started sinking. And when she put herself aground, she put herself right in front of the Confederate fort on the mainland, Fort Forest, stopping their guns from shooting. Yeah, not a great showing for the Confederate Navy. After this, they pull out and head for Elizabeth City to try to find some place to hide. Now, if you've been to this area, to Roanoke Island, you'll know where the crossroads are, where 64 crosses the island, 345 comes down north-south. Just south of that intersection is the battlefield. And it looks a lot like this today. It's swampy as all ever. First, at 8 o'clock in the morning, the Union Army stirs from its campsites about 1.5 miles away, and they come out with fife and drums playing. You think that's kind of weird, but everybody knew where they were, so it wasn't a surprise. They'll put up their naval howitzers right there at the bottom. There's 6 of them, little pop guns. They're good for short fire, but they're gonna get overwhelmed real fast, even though the Confederates only have 3 guns of different calibers. First Union Brigade shows up and immediately goes to the right. Of course, there's swamp there. So what happens when 4,000 Union soldiers go into a swamp? They sink. Yeah, not much of anything. Yeah, they basically flounder around. One regiment runs out of ammunition and pulls out. The other 3 try to go somewhere, but they wind up going nowhere fast. And yeah, that's the terrain. That's a battle and leaders drawing based on an account. And yeah, I've been there. That looks dry comparatively. Around 10 o'clock, the next Union Brigade shows up. 4,000 more Union soldiers. They're going to go left. There's another swamp there. They didn't see it. And yeah, guess what? They don't go too far either. One regiment, the 21st Massachusetts, actually crashes through the swamp, drags another half of a regiment, the 51st New York, in with them, but everyone else just kind of wallows around. All right? Eventually, the 21st works its way around the Confederate lines and starts to shoot into the back of the Confederate defenses. The last attack happens at noon. And the last attack is based on, well, it was created by a group of guys known as Zouaves. Right? The guys wearing the funny baggy pants and the little fezzes and the little short jackets. Well, these guys are the 9th New York, the Hawkins Zouaves. That's how I got involved in this. One of their companies was from my hometown in New York, so had to follow their accounts. But when they get into the fight, it's messed up. There are rifle fire all across the field. Several of the Union units are wearing gray overcoats, which immediately attract fire from their own side. The 9th New York actually shoots at the 10th Connecticut because the gray overcoats. Everything's a mess. When somebody dies on the Confederate line, we don't know if it's General Wise's son. We'll talk about him in a moment. When he goes down or someone else popular goes down, they see breaking in the Confederate line. And the major of the 9th New York, a man named Edgar Kimball, runs over to the generals who are all at that bottom end of the field and goes, "Let my men attack." And they're like, "Sure, we got nothing else. We're out of ideas." And John G. Foster, the Union field commander at that point, gives the order, "You're the man. This is the time. That's the regiment. Go." And with a cheer, the Zouaves run down the causeway. Halfway over, Confederates fire a blind volley at them. Should have been a massacre, except evidently they were a little sluggish. The Union troops all dropped down on their faces in the mud, and the round sailed over. As the Zouaves jumped back up, the Confederates now see that they're being surrounded on all sides, and they break and run. Everyone makes it to the Confederate fort at the same time to find 6 dead and a handful of wounded men in the fort. That's it. Everyone else they've streams away. By the end of the day, well, it's an island, and if you can't swim, how do you get off an island? You don't. So by 3 o'clock, well, Obadiah Jennings Wise will be shot again, 3rd time in the battle. He'll be shot in what is today Manteo, and they'll have to drag him back, and he'll succumb to his wounds at basically a house that was right behind the local high school. The rest of the garrison, 2,500 Confederates, surrender. There's nothing else they can do. And 2,500 men, 3,000 rifles, 43 cannon, 5 forts. Yeah, it's a pretty convincing victory. There were and 2 days later, the Navy completes it by beating the Confederate Mosquito Fleet at Elizabeth City, and wipes out the fleet. The entire state is now open to the Union assault. What are the results? Well, right off the bat, the Union populace just gets energized. They were about ready to kick it off, and now they're redoubled for the war effort. Something no one ever suspected. Among the Confederates that were captured, there were 200 personal servants and body slaves. And, well, the Union Army just confiscates them because under the Confiscation Act and under of the time, any material used for the war could be confiscated by the winning side. Their property, right? The Union Army captures them and keeps them. Turns to those 200 men and says, "Whatever you guys want to do, we're cool with. You want to go up north and be resettled? Put you on a boat to Massachusetts." How many of you think are going up that far? Nobody, because it's Massachusetts. It's cold. They don't know anybody. How many are going to stay here and work for the Union Army as laborers? 27. 173 willingly opt to go back into the interior. And the entire Union Army is just floored because, do they like slavery? No, actually, they're going in to steal their families and bring them out. And when they do and tell everyone else, they start a mass exodus of the Confederate workforce to the eastern part of the state. Yeah. In fact, Roanoke Island will be, at one point, 3,900 people strong in a freedmen's colony. That made it the 6th largest city by the 1860 census. It was larger than Charlotte. And when you get there today, I don't think there's 6,500 people on the whole island now, even during the summer. It was a great campaign. It worked, right? From there, they got the inlets. They'll get Morehead City. Norfolk will fall, mainly because the Confederates can't watch both sides. And once the Army of the Potomac shows up on the other side, the Confederates just evacuate the area. And then all the inland cities fall one by one. In July 1862, Ambrose Burnside called an order for all the forces that could be relieved from guard duty to report to New Bern. All right. Basically, the garrisons would be holding the place while the field army would march across and take out Wilmington. When Wilmington falls, the Confederacy is in trouble. As folks here know, what happens in January 1865 when it falls? The Confederate Army has 3 months to live, right? Supplies come in from the Bahamas and Bermuda. The British are supplying the Confederate Army. They can't do it. There was another thing. Remember I told you about that idea of recognition. There were 15 newspaper correspondents on Roanoke Island, 1 Confederate and 14 other with the Federal Army. The first embedded reporters, I guess you could say. 2 of them will actually capture one of the Confederate forts because the Union troops didn't show up in time, and they had a flag and they ran it up so they wouldn't be shot at. So they captured an empty fort. But they write these reports that make the Union Army seem like a professional, well-oiled machine. 2 of them are British. When they get back to Britain and those reports are published, all of Europe sees it, and all the military pundits say, oh, wait a minute now. Maybe the Union troops are just late starters. You know, they get up in the afternoons. Let's hold off, and let's see if the Confederacy can do anything. The next time there's talk of recognition of the Confederacy is Gettysburg, 1863. And it's only the British. Why? Because the French got bored, and now they're invading Mexico. So, yeah, it did. One could make a great argument that this battle saved the Union. Because it went from everyone should know who the Confederates are to, we'll wait, we'll see. The Punch cartoon on the left-hand side with Palmerston and Punch says, do you know who that is? And Palmerston goes, no, I don't. That's Jefferson Davis. We'll have to know him. We'll have to make friends with him later. Yeah. The Confederacy just doesn't recognize anybody. The British won't recognize the Confederacy. Lincoln might hit it a little bit better. A Washington correspondent said that everything seemed to go positive in this early time. Lincoln felt that after the battles of Donelson and Roanoke, he felt more confidence now than ever in the power of the government to suppress the rebellion. It's basically part of the line that he would use for the Gettysburg Address. From these honored dead, we take increased devotion to the cause, which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we highly resolve these dead shall not have died in vain. The Union Army wins at Roanoke Island, and it may have actually won the war, both in the minds and the hearts of its own people. Thank you. Okay.
How far from the bridge, from the road there, the road to the bridge, how far was the Confederate lines over the south there? Is that like a few feet?
If you stand at that intersection with the government facility behind you and the CVS off to your left, it's 150 feet. Actually, Confederate Reserve units were up at a creek today. If you know the area, the Silver Bonsai and the Tiki Grill are on those creeks. Yeah, but that's where Confederate reserves were.
I was wondering, for the former slaves, which they call contraband, when they released those, and some of them went back inland, did very many of them end up in the North Carolina dismal swamps forming the maroon colonies there?
No, actually, at this point, they knew that the Union Army was going to at least safeguard their protection for the short term. The maroon communities in the Dismal Swamp had already been formed, but it was a rough life living out there. So these folks basically went in, picked their families up, and came back. Way in the back.
My question is to contextualize slaves are, you know, according to probably their perspective, running on. You know, this is a bad time for them. What is the white population's reaction? Do we see anything changing? Of course, this is the greatest fear of settlers, right?
Right,
Slaves
yeah.
escaping upright and having somebody out, so.
Interestingly enough, the biggest complaint that local white people had was not that they were the local enslaved were freed, but that all the others came and cut all their firewood and cut down their trees, because the way they created the freedmen's colony was any land that had been unoccupied from the battle was confiscated. Well, who was going to stay and wait for a battle to see where the cannonballs landed? A lot of people left the island. And before they returned, they suddenly found out that their land had been confiscated and was divvied up to these people. They petitioned the government. One family will petition till 1866 in a very long, drawn-out dispute, legal dispute. They will win. And the family, the Meekins, will actually, the eldest will set fire to the buildings that were not originally to the plantation, just so that nobody comes back. Yeah. But afterwards, because very few of these African Americans will stay, except for the local African Americans, there's a general return back to the original idea. Don't imagine plantations and large numbers of slaves. On Roanoke Island, like I said, you fished and you lumbered. Guess what? You're working with your slave, or better yet, he's rented out to somebody else who's working with him.
Today, historic markers, state parks, county parks, any museums? What's your number?
Of this, until I got there, Fort Raleigh National Historic Site didn't talk about it at all. Basically, I brought the 19th century into their storyline. The state site, which is based on the Elizabeth II, touches on it as part of their overall story of Roanoke Island. But as for an actual battlefield or museum dedicated to it, there's one person who has a collection of artifacts that he and his family found that's on display, and that's it. The battlefield is accidentally preserved, partially because it's a wildlife refuge. Back again. No.
In terms of both the Confederate and Union forces, when we see them confronting sort of this unique tactic, especially with the Union forces coming across the sandbars and then the tough roads that you're describing, as well as the Confederate forces facing the ridiculous assault. Union forces also going into swamps when it was crazy. Do we see Iowa one taking lessons learned basically and taking that back to sort of inform themselves like, hey, you know, here on the terrain is going to be like this, you better watch out along the coastline, or the Confederates like, hey, look what they do. Do we see any sort of transmission of knowledge in that?
Not among the generals, because they're going to get rotated out of the area, but several of the garrison units will stay in North Carolina and fight, and they'll fight at Petersburg and then return back to North Carolina. So they'll take the extra learning of how to stay warm in a wet and cold environment. But yeah, the generals don't think of anything else. The whole Fort Fisher and other expeditions are pretty much the same style as before the war, which is basically a medieval siege. You land away from the guns and you march to them. This was the first time under the guns.
Frank Leslie's Illustrated Newspaper of New York had a lot of woodcuts of that battle.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think people would remember that because there were double-sized pictures of what happened there.
Yes. And the question?
Question is, did it make any impact other than Lincoln and so forth, that this was both difficult and important battle?
Well, the words will make more of the impact. Like I said, the 14 Union or Northern correspondents, there are a handful of artists, but mostly it's the words that tell the story, and that'll help out a lot.
So at this point in the war, Lincoln is desperate for wins, and he loves those who do win. And why didn't he, Burnside, get support to go after Weldon or Wellington?
George B. McClellan. End of every argument in 1862. George B. McClellan needed all the troops he could get to the point where he wouldn't reinforce. He didn't have enough troops. He got some minor reinforcements, but they basically just covered losses due to disease. And his troops were stretched out. It would be interesting to see how much of a field force he could have gotten at New Bern in July. But that's the same time that McClellan got thrown back in 7 days, and Mealy called for reinforcements, and guess who got called out? Burnside. So it went from an active front to almost immediately a sleepy part of the war.
Mike, other than the Zouaves, how did you first become drawn to these chapters of Civil War history, so much so that you spent years of your professional life?
Oh gosh. How much time do we have exactly? It only took 5 years to write. But no, basically, getting in 2003 to Fort Raleigh, the man who hired me actually said, "I don't care about the 19th century. I really don't want to do it. It's you." And I said, "Okay, how far can I go?" And he goes, "I don't care. Just run with it." And I ran with it as far as we could. When we did our display layout, it actually didn't have the Civil War in it. It had a bit on the Freedmen's Colony, maybe less than 25% of the entire display. Everything else was on the Lost Colony. And I said, no, that's not flying. We're going to have to talk. You can't just throw something out there and not have any connotations on it. You got to have some plus or minus. And I said, the battle's got to be talked about. And they're like, oh, all right. So yeah, being with the Park Service just expanded everything that needed to be done.
How many casualties did you make?
234? Huh? No. The Confederates lose a lot more. I forgot about the part of the 2nd North Carolina Battalion. They land just in time to race to the battlefield when all the Confederates are racing away from it. And they make a turn. The road is still there, and it still turns. You can still see where they engaged one company of the 21st Massachusetts. And it was kind of a jump scare. As they came around the corner, there was the Massachusetts guys. They both shocked each other. The Confederates fired with muskets. They didn't hit anything. The Massachusetts guys with rifles did. They hit 8 guys, and the rest of the regiment just panicked and ran. And by the time they got reordered and brought back to the field, the battle was over. Everyone was surrendering. So the Confederates lost about 80 guys, but mainly the surrender is what the casualties. 2,500 off the map.
What happened to the prisoners? Were they paroled?
They were paroled. Actually, that was one of the saddest things. These guys fought really hard. Most of the battle was fought by Wise's Virginians and 1 or 2 companies of the 8th North Carolina, because they were the locals who knew their area. And when everyone else surrendered, it started getting tossed through the Confederacy that these guys were worthless. These troops were horrible. And when they were repatriated in Elizabeth City about a month later, the 3rd Georgia, who had originally been on Roanoke Island and built most of the defenses, were the ones who greeted them and treated them very shabbily. The Union troops all recounted how these guys came off to jeers and being called traitors and cowards. A little side note, and this is one of those ones where it reaches across the divide. The 24th Massachusetts actually took control of the prisoners. And evidently there was a bond that created between some of the Wise Legions and them. In 1864, as part of the campaign south of Richmond under Butler, 24th Massachusetts got cut up pretty badly in one of the battles, and one of the officers was captured. As he's being marched off, some Virginians saw him and raced over to him and said, "You're from the 24th Massachusetts. We can tell by your hat." And they said, he's like, "Yeah, duly noted. Follow us." And they take him over to a fire. They feed him. They give him a blanket. They give him money. They tell him what to do when he gets into prison or war camp. Put your money in your shoes so nobody can take it. Put it in your socks. And they said, "We wish we could do more for you. You were the guys who treated us nicely at Roanoke Island." So, yeah. Way back.
First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. You mentioned Wise,
Hmm.
obviously, he died that day. His son, though?
His son, Obadiah Jennings Wise, is the one who dies.
Oh, son.
Yeah. Henry Wise had 14 kids. Of course, Obadiah dies during the war. John Wise, who writes, yeah, I know, that's impressive. End of an Era, John Wise writes, which is basically a good story about what his father was about. And Henry Wise is one of the kind of people you meet who never tells anything to glorify anybody. All right, he's a straight shooter right off the bat. He's the man who told Robert E. Lee that there is no government. There hasn't been a government for a year and a half as they were marching to Appomattox. And then turned to Lee and said, "And that means that any soldier who dies now, their blood is on your head." Now imagine that, telling Robert E. Lee that you were the cause of all this suffering. Stop it. Even Lee couldn't handle that. One of the other times that Lee meets Wise, Wise curses up a storm because his wagons aren't moving. And Lee's like, "Generals don't say that, General Wise." And he's like, "General Lee, well, you can pray, and General Jackson can pray to God. Let me curse, will you?" The man was a straight shooter. If you saw Cold Mountain, right? That's the scene where the blind man is selling peanuts. That's actually a homage to Henry Wise. He was selling peanuts to the Union soldiers because there was nothing else to do and he couldn't get the money to go back home. So he was roasting peanuts and selling them off. Any other questions?
Thank you so
No?
much, Mike.
Thank you very much.